Good afternoon. I'm Kalichuran, the Chairperson of the KZN Centre of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers. I extend a warm welcome to our presenters, Patricia, Schroder, and Keith Anderson. Rob Stevens, a past Chairperson and my support, officials and members of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, and all attendees. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I hope you are all observing the necessary protocols to minimize the risk of infection to yourself and to stop the spread to family and community. Attendees, please take note of the following considerations. Ensure that the volume on your device is turned up and that you have a stable internet connection for smooth streaming and audio. You can ask questions via the questions panel, which is located within the GoToWebinar control panel. By default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. You will not be able to chat with each other. However, you are encouraged to ask questions. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. A recording of this presentation will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, which is called SAIEE TV. The recording will also be made available on the SAIEE website. Under the Events drop-down menu in the section Past Events and Webinars. This page is updated regularly, so check as often as possible for new uploads. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel for more uploads. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few weeks after this webinar, once we have received the CPD validation number for this webinar from EXA. Our presenters this afternoon is Patricia Schroder, who holds a BSc degree in chemical engineering, a master's degree in environmental management, and an MBA. Patricia is a registered chartered environmental manager with the Chartered Institute of Environmental Managers in London, a certified director with the Institute of Directors of Southern Africa. Patricia has a passion for environmental protection and SMME development in this sector for over 30 years. Patricia founded and developed successful award-winning SMMEs, which operate nationwide and internationally within the environmental services sector. As the current director of Urban Elements Proprietary Limited, founded by herself in 2016, she is focused on the growing demand for assistance and consultation regarding extended producer responsibility development and support, circular economy principles, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals implementation, environmental best practice and training, amongst other professional offerings to her clients. Her success comes from innovative solutions-driven thinking. Urban Elements has been awarded national and international contracts for projects with the World Resources Forum, the GIZ, the United Nations, the Industrial Development Organization, and the United Nations Environmental Program, amongst others. She serves on various boards, is a member of professional organizations, and is an appointed consultant for the renewable energy sector in Southern Africa. She is married and has 2 sons, and her hobbies include scuba diving, traveling, and art, so she is all-rounded. Our second presenter is Keith Anderson. Keith matriculated at Damlin College in 1969 and has been educated at Damlin College, Stellenbosch, the Stellenbosch Graduate School of Business, UCT Graduate School of Business, Heriot-Watt University, LaSalle University, and Century University in the USA. Currently, Keith sits on the board of numerous companies. He is the past president of the Information Technology Association of South Africa and is currently chairperson of eWaste Association of South Africa, which he founded in 2006. He has also chaired various REMCO committees and finance and investment committees. Keith has also served on the board of the ISET-CETA for 4 years. He is also a member of the BUSA Transformation Committee. Keith was a finalist in the 2012 ICT Personalities of the Year and was awarded the ICT Social Responsibility Award in 2012. Keith drafted the first industry waste management plan in 2010 and submitted it to the DEA. Keith is a sought-after public speaker and presents papers both locally and internationally on e-waste management and the circular economy. He has just launched the Africa WEE Forum and with the objective of establishing a uniform e-waste standard throughout Africa, like the WEE Forum in Europe. The presentation this afternoon is titled Electronic Waste, Information Session on the recently published Extended Producer Responsibility Regulations and Sector Notices. For many years, the collection, recovery, and recycling of waste lighting, electrical and electronic goods have been voluntary and primarily driven by the private sector. Without mandatory conditions in South Africa's waste lighting recovery rate is between 3 to 5%, and waste electrical and electronic items is between 7 to 12%. Clearly, this needs improvement. The recently published Section 18 Extended Producer Responsibility Regulations and Sector Notices implementing the mandatory EPR will change how producers and brand owners of lighting and electrical and electronic goods will have to take financial and operational responsibilities for the end-of-life management of all goods placed on the market. I now hand you over to Patricia and Keith.
Oh, shit. Sorry. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Jay, for that very lengthy introduction. Very kind of you. I really wish I could go scuba diving more, but unfortunately that's not possible that often anymore due to all of these important things that we are going to discuss today. So as you mentioned, I represent the renewable energy sector of South Africa, but at the same time also the lighting sector, industry sector. And my presentation today will be focusing on the lighting sector, and Keith will be focusing on the electrical and electronic products. So to start today's proceedings, I'm going to move on to the slide which gives us a background of EPR legislation in South Africa. Extended producer responsibility is the extended name for EPR. So EPR regulations and the section notices were published on the 5th of November 2020 for implementation. And the Section 18 Extended Producer Responsibility Regulations is applicable to all industries in South Africa, or all sectors. So it's an overarching umbrella regulation that governs all sector types in South Africa. There were separate notices published to various sectors, and those were called sector notices, and they were issued individually to the electrical, electronic equipment sector, and then the lighting sector, and then paper and packaging sectors received a notice. So there were 3 notices published on the 5th of November at the same time as the overarching EPR regulations. When the regulations were published on the 5th of November, the sectors involved were not satisfied with the regulations as they were published and requested amendments. The amendments process was granted by the Minister after we had a meeting with her on the 1st of December last year, and she granted an amendment process where she chose a task team to work together with her department's team to go through the amendments together. Keith and myself both serve on that task team, and we are currently still in discussions with the department, and we are finalizing the amendments as we speak. But so for these amendments to take place, the Minister also granted an extension to the implementation of the EPR regulations from the 5th of November to the 5th of May 2021. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the sector notices specifically, or the regulations and the sector notices. So you'll see there number 1, that is the EPR regulations. As I mentioned, it's applicable to all sectors. It provides the framework for all Section 18 EPR schemes, and it sets minimum requirements for EPR schemes and PROs to operate. I will go into the definitions a little bit more later so that you can understand what these acronyms mean. The number 2 there is relating to the specific sector notices. So as I mentioned before, there were 3 notices that were published, and they were applicable to electrical and electronic equipment and the lighting sectors and paper and packaging. But in today's discussion, we'll be focusing on EEE and lighting. And it also governs how implementation will be done for these various sectors, and it also details the products and class of products that are identified, and it also sets targets. These are recycling targets, amongst other targets that have to be met by producers in the various sectors. So I'm going to cover the definitions because you would have heard quite a few acronyms there. So what is a producer? And this is according to the regulations. So a producer means any person or category of persons or a brand owner who is engaged in the commercial manufacture, conversion, refurbishment, or import of new and or used products. So in other words, any product that falls under the categories as per the sector notices. The people who import them, refurbish them, are termed producers, and that's very important to remember. And then of course the brand owner means a person or category of persons or company who sells any product under a registered brand label. And then a producer responsibility organization, which we term PRO, means a non-profit company established by producers operating in any of the industrial sectors or waste streams covered in the notice to support the implementation of their industry Section 18 scheme. So extended producer responsibility, it means a producer's responsibility for their product is extended to the post-consumer stage of a product's life cycle. The word scheme means a system that puts EPR obligations into effect. A scheme is essentially an implementation plan that needs to be developed on behalf of producers, that is submitted to the department to detail how the scheme will be implemented. And a free rider, this is a hot topic that has come up amongst producers quite often. A free rider means a firm or an individual who benefits from the actions or efforts of another in relation to an extended producer responsibility scheme without sharing the obligations and the costs. There's always going to be someone that's going to try and duck and dive and not comply to the regulations to save some money, but there are mechanisms in place to catch free riders. But it's important that you understand the term free rider. Okay, the next slide covers what is EPR and PRO. And I'm going into a bit more detail now, further to the definition. So the extended producer responsibility is a policy approach under which producers are given the end-of-life financial and operational responsibility for their products put on market. And note financial and operational responsibility. This mainly involves a take-back scheme of post-consumer products for the collection, transportation, repair, refurbishment, management, and treatment. Treatment is another term for recycling or beneficiation. Assigning such responsibility could in principle provide incentives to prevent waste going to landfill, promote environmental protection, and to support the achievement of consumer recycling and materials management goals. This is the targets I spoke about. It further extends to beneficiation opportunities, innovations, skill development, and job creation. A producer responsibility organization is the organization that assists the producers to meet these extended producer responsibility targets through various key stakeholders within the value chain in the country. The PRO is responsible for setting up and managing the value chain mechanisms for the targeted waste material and to create awareness for the recycling of all lighting, electrical, and electronic waste. And you will see the diagram there is the PRO is central to all of those functions, from manufacturing to design of the product, to the producer, the brand owner, consumer, the waste generation part, the waste collection part, the reuse recycling, and then that feeds back into the manufacturing loop, supporting all circular economy principles. Okay. So I've decided to put this slide in because we have been in consultation with the department for many, many years. First around the Section 28 regulations and now the Section 18. So Section 28 was the block that's not covered or surrounded with a red border. And that meant it would have been a government managed system, so it would have been a tax and it would have passed through Treasury, and the sectors and the industries did not approve of that method for various reasons, and lobbied to change it to become an industry managed system, which was allowed in 2019, December 2019. The minister withdrew the Section 28 and then issued the Section 18, which is the preferred option. So the EPR fee is now an industry managed system, so the industry has full control over the fee, the spend of the fee, and how it's disbursed, and that it's meant for the intended purpose. So the main points on EPR regulatory requirements, and these are just a few, I just put in a summary of the requirements. The regulations make all producers fully accountable for compliance, and the word is, the emphasis is on producers. The regulations make the producers responsible and liable for the development and implementation of an EPR scheme and compliance against each product targets. The process will be managed and financed by the producers of electrical and electronic equipment and lighting equipment through the payment of an extended producer responsibility fee by the producer. Fees will be determined for each producer based on volumes of products or class of products that each producer puts on market. The fees are dependent on weight and recyclability of each item, on a rand per kilogram or per unit, depending on the product. The products that are more difficult to collect or recycle will attract a higher fee. So this is where the circular economy principles come in again. The more recyclable or easier to manage the product is, the lower the EPR fee is. So producers will be required to conduct life cycle assessments, and this has been a sticking point with the department, and they are not prepared to budge on that, within 3 years for each product, accounting for changes in design, composition or production processes in order to reduce the consumption of natural resources, as well as toxicity of each product and volumes of waste generated. Extended producer responsibility will in turn promote design for recycling. Okay, so to continue, this is the main points of the PRO. The previous slide was the EPR, the main, you'll see it's number 1, the EPR overarching regulations, the main requirements for those, and this is now the main points of the PRO and the regulatory requirements that they need to comply with. A producer must register with a compliant PRO Non-registration means that a producer will be a free rider and face the severe penalties, which is imprisonment up to 15 years, fines or fine and imprisonment. And the Department of Environmental Affairs has a very, very good track record of keeping these penalties and enforcing penalties. The PRO must be a registered non-profit company and must be managed by a board of directors. The PRO must register with the department. Producers must register with the department, and the PRO will normally notify when this registration process opens. The PRO must be a registered non-profit company, be managed and comply with the Companies Act, the NPO Act, and the Corporate Governance Guidelines. This is a very, very important point. PROs have the vital role in representing the collective interests of their respective sectors, and the PRO is the vehicle to assist all producers to meet the regulatory requirements, and the PRO represents all producers in managing the EPR scheme. The regulations require that the PRO submits an EPR scheme implementation plan on behalf of the producers. The scheme implementation plan that will be developed along with the proposed EPR fee must be submitted for ministerial approval by no later than the 5th of November 2021. The development and operations must be funded by all the producers. We are currently developing the lighting implementation plan. It is the first draft has been started, so that is ongoing. The producers will be required to report performance measured against the individual targets and to submit verified data and performance audit reports to the department at various intervals annually. The PRO will fulfill this requirement for the producers. And the PRO needs to collect, administer, and disburse the EPR fees collected from obligated producers. So the main points on the lighting sector notice, as I said, I'm focusing on lighting today. So the lighting sector must set up the procedures, the processes, and invest resources to implement the EPR measures linked to the collection of the products in the post-consumer stage, the reuse, recycling, and energy recovery, and so on. All the above must comply with the Waste Management Act and other applicable regulations in terms of licensing and registrations of the post-consumer service providers. The lighting sector must set up a producer responsibility organization, and Lightcycle SA NPC has been established, and that's who I'm representing today. Targets are set for the products for a 5-year period, and I've got the targets here. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but this is just for lighting. You'll see that the product categories are listed on the left-hand side, and then it's over a 5-year period. We've got to meet these targets for collection, recovery, and recyclability. As the Jay that did the introductions stated, lighting at the moment is sitting between 3 to 5%. So we've got a lot of work to do to get these targets achieved. So I'm going to talk about the lighting sector producer responsibility organization. It's named Lightcycle NPC. It was established in 2018, and it was established by lighting producers, and the board of directors are lighting producers. And it was that there was a need to establish it to meet the regulations, and it's established on behalf of the entire lighting sector in South Africa. So any lighting producers in this audience, please take note of what I'm going to say. So there is so the lighting sector PRO applies to producers of lighting products or class of products, which you would have seen in the target screen before, to which extended producer responsibility producer responsibility applies as per the Section 18 notice. So there is 2 types of memberships available in the PRO. There's a normal membership structure, and this is available to both producers and other stakeholders that are going to be participating in the value chain. So there's a tiered membership, which is a sliding scale membership fee structure, and that is for large enterprises or patron members, medium enterprises, small and emerging enterprises, national, provincial and local government institutions, academia, and then of course your individual members, which could be technicians or anybody that has an interest in this sector. There is that option for individual members. The deliverables for normal or general membership is, and these are not limited to these points, communications on current legislation and industry news, so keeping up to date with what's happening in terms of the regulations and so on. Producers will be able to participate in the EPR scheme development, which is very, very important. We have got producers contributing at the moment, but we need more participation so that we can have more accurate data. Access to auditing and verification services for suppliers, that's in the downstream value chain. I'll go through that graphic later. So that these suppliers can meet regulatory and PRO supply chain requirements. So it's a certification. Access to training and development programs, knowledge sharing and consumer awareness campaigns, marketing and advertising opportunities, and then research and development, which everyone can contribute towards. So that is your general or normal membership. And then there is the producer EPR membership, which is mandatory. So as you saw, the regulation states that producers must register with a PRO. And so this membership is available to obligated producers only. So the deliverables as per the requirements for the PROs, and again, it's not limited to these points, but these are the most important points, is to provide compliant and transparent EPR support to producer members. Collection and handling of the EPR fees, market data, and so on is kept confidential and not shared. So those there are mechanisms that are used, independent parties, so that the data is kept confidential and not shared. It ensures producer compliance and reporting to the department as per the Section 18 regulations. It disburses the fees to the supply value chain to meet the targets and obligations of producers as per the regulations. It provides skills development and program development because that's what the regulations call for, job creation in the sector, support the recovery, recycling, waste reduction, beneficiation opportunities, and so on. And the department and other government liaison, the producers will have access to that. Informal sector integration, which is a big point for the department. They want to see this happening in all sectors in South Africa. And the establishment of best practices and industry norms and standards, and then embracing the circular economy principles, as I mentioned earlier. So this is just a few of the benefits or the deliverables as an obligated EPR member. And I just want to talk about this. Once the scheme has been submitted to the department, the implementation plan has been submitted to the department. It will sit for 60 days and the minister will review it, and then from 60 days from date of submission, EPR fees become mandatory. So you'd need to pay the EPR fees. So this is just a high level view of the structure of Light Cycle SA. As I said, it's a non-profit company. We call this a black box registry, but that is the independent data that is held so that it is kept confidential. That is fed through to the Light Cycle SA non-profit operations, and then the operations manages the post-consumer value chain and other social services or projects or the implementation of the scheme. And the producers will have input into obviously have input into this registry because they'd have to provide data. The money flow will come into the operations, or the EPR fee will come into the operations in order to satisfy these requirements. The department, the PRO will do all the reporting to the department on behalf of producers for targets, reporting, and free rider identification. The department wants to know who is not participating. And then also the high-level monitoring and policy enforcement will come from the department, so they would assist in that sense. and custom SARS and DEF support in terms of getting data on importers and manufacturers and brand owners within the country. Okay, this is now it's a very busy slide because it has to actually all fit on one slide to make sense. But I'm just going to quickly summarize this slide. So you have your pre-consumer over here, which is your producers, your distributors, your brand owners, your retailers are part of this pre-consumer stage. So they're also known as producers. That goes to the consumer. And then in some cases, you'll have repair centers where goods are repaired and then goes back to the consumer, or if they're not repaired, they go into the post-consumer circle. And this is your public, private, and households and so on that form your consumer base. All of this is fed into the post-consumer chain over here, which is the part where the highest effort and cost is applicable. So this is where it all happens. So you have your collectors, you have your transportation, and all of these have to be according to standards and regulations. And then you have your recyclers, and then you have your collection facilities, and then in this case over here, you could have refurbishment, upcycling, secondhand, or resale. All of these have to be according to regulations, because there are waste management regulations that govern all of these activities. And then disposal is the last resort, but there may be products that cannot be recycled or parts of products that cannot be recycled, and these have to go to disposal. And all of this has to be reported back to government because they want to know what's going on here. So you have your direct support mechanisms, such as I mentioned, your inspectorate, your data protection, and then your auditors, and then your external support mechanisms, which is your government and your academia, which will help support other activities. And this, I just want to point out that this slide will be very similar. This one was drafted for lighting, but this will be very similar, or if not the same, for electrical and electronic equipment, renewable energy equipment, and so on. So what are the next steps? Any producers out there, we need to register now to become a member. So, and that's available on the Light Cycle SA website, so that you can be compliant with the EPR regulations. You need to choose on the website there, you need to choose the correct menu to register, either as a producer, brand owner, or a service provider. Service provider would be someone like a transporter or a recycler, or anybody that could manage the waste stream. And then general membership, as I mentioned before, your individuals and so on. And communication and invoicing will follow once registered. And I would strongly encourage producers to register so that you can be part of the process and be involved, because at the end of the day, it does impact your organization. So I encourage you to be a part of the process, join in and be a part of everything, and have your say. Okay, then in summary, PROs will have a vital role in assisting producers to identify shared constraints and synergistic opportunities. Along with stronger collaboration across the value chain, a mindset shift will be needed, not only for legislative compliance, but also for the benefit of the consumer and the environment. And this is built into the schemes, where there will be awareness campaigns and so on. Intensive consumer awareness campaigns, as I said, will also help to drive behavior change. The EPR will see an investment in collection infrastructure, not only providing consumers with more convenient recycling facilities, but also a concerted recovery effort at the pre-consumer post-industrial phase. EPR will be about the journey, not the destination, and you cannot go it alone. Okay, there's my contact details there. So please feel free to contact me if you have any further queries after this webinar. but also I'm open for questions and answers at the end. I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Keith, who is the chairperson of eWASA, the E-Waste Association of South Africa, which deals with electronic and electrical goods. The previous presentation was for lighting equipment. So Keith, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Chair. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. And thanks to Patricia for doing all the heavy lifting and going through all the legislative requirements. I know it can be a huge amount of information to absorb. Fortunately, most of what she said, as she has indicated, is applicable to electronic waste as well. Patricia is also going to be driving the slide presentation for me. Next slide. Thanks, Patricia. So what is e-waste? As Patricia defined lighting, so e-waste is anything that's electrical or electronic. In other words, it works with a plug or it works with a battery. And that covers everything from small household goods right through to huge equipment, switchgear, electronic circuitry, renewable energy issues, electric vehicles. So it's a wide variety of products and services. Thanks, Patricia. So who is eWASA? So I formed eWASA in 2005, and it was formally registered in 2008. And I introduced what is now known as eWaste. It was known in Europe already, but into South Africa at that point in time. We started educating the people, liaising with producers, government departments, helping setting up recyclers, refurbishers, and trying to set some form of norms and standards for people to abide by. Bearing in mind that this was all done on a voluntary basis because there was no legislation in place to compel producers to comply. And as was mentioned, when I drafted the first industry waste management plan in 2010 and sent it to the minister, she received it, acknowledged it, but there was nothing that she could do because she didn't have any enabling legislation to enforce it. So now we are 11 years later, and we've now come full circle to this point. eWASA is also a level 2 in terms of BE certification. And since inception, we've been working with all the vendors that now form the circular economy. One of the important things is to manage the EPR funds, quality control, public relations, education and training. I won't go through all those points because they're already mentioned by Patricia. Thanks, Patricia. So once again, who potentially are we talking to? Government at all levels, large private organizations, business and industry, small businesses, and private individuals. Thanks, Patricia. This is just to give you an idea of who we are. So it's a cross-section of our membership. So on the left-hand side, those are some of our producer members: Samsung, Canon, Black & Decker, Convatec, and so forth. Then we have dismantlers, which are members. We have recyclers who are members, and we've got academia who we involved with who are members who are also partners. So the reason that we've done this right from the get-go, which is slightly different to a lot of the older established PROs, we wanted to get a 360 view of all stakeholders involved in what is now referred to as the circular economy, so that we have a better understanding of everyone's needs and to ensure that we can put a scheme in place that's cost effective and efficient. Next slide. So the guiding principles for us is responsibility. So as is said by legislation, the manufacturers, importers, distributors need to commit to the recycling of the product. It's now become legislation. From a simplistic point of view, in a perfect world, as the consumer, they should be able to go to the nearest collection point, and there should be many of them around the country where they can drop off their end-of-life products free of charge, knowing that those certified collection points, and I stress the word certified collection points, will then uplift the end of life products and ensure that they land up at, once again, a certified refurbisher or recycler for proper and safe disposal. It's important to ensure that there's reliability in the recycling chain, and there must be independent, trustworthy controls. Some of you might be aware of the debacle that we had with Redisa, so that would be a perfect example of how not to set up a PRO. Liquidity, it's important to understand that recycling does cost money, and the EPR fee is there to assist with that. I want to stress that the EPR fee, Extended Producer Responsibility fee, is not there to improve the profitability of recyclers. It's there to incentivize recyclers, to ensure that they treat all waste, all fractions, not just the valuable ones, but the invaluable ones as well, to ensure that we have zero product or zero waste going to landfill. And as from August this year, eWaste is now banned from landfill sites, so therefore there's further pressure on us to ensure that we have simplistic systems in place with sufficient collection points. Next slide. So very briefly, just to, from a pictorial point of view, so the green slide is what's covered by the recycling fee. It's partly used towards fund the collection. So the collection and transport is the single biggest cost factor in EPR schemes. Sorting, separation, grading, and then ultimately the disposal of the material, and then separating into viable and non-viable. And it's the non-viable product that's important here, because, for example, in the e-waste sector, recyclers like to recycle laptops, switch gear, telecom stuff, because there's a lot of gold, silver, and copper in those products. But they don't like to recycle stuff like computer housings or the old CRT, the cathode ray tube monitors, because there's more plastic and lead dust in there and nothing of real value. So it's actually a negative cost for them to recycle those. So we use this fee to ask them to ensure that they recycle those at the lowest cost factor, and we pay them for that. We don't pay them necessarily to recycle a laptop, because the cost of recycling versus the positive fractions that can be extracted from that recycling process will help offset those costs. Thanks, Patricia. This is just to give you an idea of the structure in the e-waste industry. So starting at tier 4, that's the informal waste collectors that you'll find on the waste dumps, or moving around, pushing trolleys, or collecting waste from various homes and so forth. Then you get the entry-level dismantlers, who can be one-man bands to small organizations operating from a small premises. And it can be 1 or 2 man people up to fairly large 15, 20 people businesses. Then the next level is the first line recyclers. And what we mean by first line recyclers, so once you've collected and once you've sorted, and one of the advantages that we have in South Africa with our high levels of unemployment, as much sorting and separation that you can do manually is critical, because it increases the value of the fraction. And when I use the term fraction, once you've taken the product and you've dismantled it completely and you put it through some mechanized process, the shredded material that comes out, we refer to that as fractions in the industry. And if you separate those properly before it goes into that mechanized process, the value of those fractions increase dramatically. So for example, copper and gold, you can get almost 99.56% recovery, provided it's done properly. If you just threw it all into a crusher or a shredder without separating it, you'd reduce the value of that fraction dramatically because of the quality. And then tier 1 is what we call cradle to cradle recyclers. And currently in South Africa, there is no tier 1 recyclers. There are some that are busy migrating in, and 1 or 2 of them will be there shortly. But this is a fairly costly process, because you have to be able to treat all forms of e-waste in a responsible manner, which requires, as I said, quite a lot of specialized equipment, and that comes at a price. And you could be looking anything from 50 million rand up to 250 million rand to put up a proper tier 1 recycling facility. Bear in mind that the South African market is not that big, given the size of our population, plus minus 55 million people. It's also estimated that per capita in South Africa, we generate about 6 kilograms of e-waste per person per annum. So if you look at that, there's roughly about 350, 360 million tons of e-waste that's put onto the market. And currently our recycling rates are somewhere between 6 and 12%. So it shows you we're coming off a very low base, and there's lots of opportunity. But also you have to be careful, because if you look at, and that's part of, as Patricia mentioned, we sit on the task team negotiating with the Department of Environmental Affairs right now. They're very bullish on targets, and they want to put what we believe potentially unrealistic targets in place. If you just use Europe, and I'm very careful about, always using the Eurocentric model, but there is lessons to be learned. So in Europe, where they've been having recycling in place and legislation in place for 20 years, you can see that on average their recycling rates are still below 50%, as a EU. And you have to ask the reasons why, and there's many reasons for that, which we won't go into now. And that's why we say, let's be realistic with the targets. Let's set those targets bearing in mind what we do know, and then let's grow accordingly from there. Thanks, Patricia. Next slide. This is very important. I referred briefly to the reducer system. So from the time that it becomes end of life, the consumers must then be, as we mentioned, must be able to take the end of life products and drop them off at a certified collection point. And I stress that once again, certified collection point must meet certain minimum standards. It must be clean, it must be secure, mustn't be exposed to the elements, or some just basic requirements that you need. So those collection points must be controlled. As soon as they reach capacity, there will be a mechanism, a system in place, which will then trigger for a collector or transporter to come and uplift it and transport that to the entry-level dismantler or recycler. And as I said, those first two steps, the collection, the transport, is the single biggest cost factor in the reverse logistics. Then the next step is the treatment, and the reason that it's in red, it's important because, once again, bearing in mind the whole purpose of EPR is to ensure that end-of-life products are treated in an environmentally sound manner. And once again, strict norms and standards, audits need to be put in place, and this is all the processes that we as PROs, both in lighting and in eWaste, we ensure in place so that those recyclers issue destruction certificates that are authenticated, and that it's a safety mechanism for any of the producers, that they all of a sudden don't find some of their products that supposedly were recycled being sold or put onto the market in Ghana or Nigeria or rest of Africa and so forth. One of the other important things for a PRO is to publish the results. So from an eWASA point of view, we would publish our results quarterly. So every quarter we would do a countrywide trip, provided we're allowed to travel then, or otherwise we would do it electronically. And we would say for this previous quarter, collectively, and we won't do it by producer because that information is confidential, but collectively we've recycled 100,000 tons for the quarter, and the cost per ton recycled was X, and the funds that we've received was Y, so that, bearing in mind that the PROs are not for profits, at the end of the day we should have an even balanced book. And then the comparison is, once again, you must always compare ourselves because it's a good thing. So we would compare with other PROs around the world to track how we were doing and comparing against that. Thanks, Patricia. Planned outcomes, collection of all material with or without value, and that's important because, as I said, some e-waste hasn't got no value. It's more hazardous and it's almost worthless from a fraction perspective. We need to be governed by the EPR solution. Locally, in dismantling and recycling can create jobs, and we see quite a lot of opportunities for this. Local profit for metals that are not hazardous to recycling. So what has been traditionally happening is people have been cherry picking, uplifting all the motherboards and the components that have got value, and just shipping them off to all parts of the world. So all that value is leaving the country, and that's why we want to use EPR fees to incentivize local recyclers to capitalize their business or recapitalize their business, so they can treat excuse me, they can treat all forms of e-waste responsibly. We can recover the precious, semi-precious materials and put them back into the economy as secondary raw materials. Once again, access to global markets where beneficiation options do not exist in South Africa. It's an opportunity for us to create a whole host of things. And already in the e-waste sector, there's many things that are happening, which is really encouraging to see. So from some of the plastics that are recovered, people are making paving, they're making garden furniture, they're making garden fencing, they're making waste to art. So there's some really innovative stuff that's been taking place, and a lot of waste to art stuff has actually been exported at this point in time. Thanks, Patricia. Material value, so I've covered that, and I once again just stress that the EPR fee, because this is often the biggest concern amongst producers. The fee is not used to make recyclers more profitable. It's used to incentivize those recyclers who have committed and put the equipment in place, which has cost them a fair amount of money, to incentivize them to treat all forms of e-waste in a responsible manner. Thanks. Socio-economical value. Currently, the majority of e-waste collected and treated holds value. Non-valuable e-waste is stored or dumped. As I mentioned, with roughly a 12% recycling rate, the bulk of the other 78%, 88% is either going to landfill or it's leaving the country. Extended producer responsibility will enable all those fractions to be treated appropriately at end of life. EPR becomes a financial safety net and creates a market demand for material. Already you can see those recyclers that have put proper mechanization in place are getting high value returns for the fractions. Consumers will know that the e-waste will always be collected and treated, and that's a guarantee that we provide. If you take it to a certified collection point under the eWASA collection scheme or the light cycle collection scheme, it will be uplifted and transported to a registered recycler. And government does not need to finance the collection and treatment. Right from the get-go, we've been arm wrestling that this must be an industry-led program and not a government-led program. We've seen government failures around Redisa, the plastic bag scenario. That's why we believe that industry, and at this point in time, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be industry-led and driven, and that is why when you're choosing a PRO, you need to look carefully at who their board is, how long they've been in business, what are the systems and controls that they've got in place, and do they know anything about what they are doing. Thanks, Patricia. Next slide. Material supply chain growth. I've already touched on that, so we can move on to the next slide there, Patricia. Once again, the financial model is exactly or very similar to what Patricia was saying, but that's how the flow of funds would be, and all the parties involved in this collection chain. So municipalities have a big role to play, retail stores have got a big role to play, and then collection sites across the country. Thanks, Patricia. The finance and recovery, and I've explained that for you, the waste types. So currently construction and industrial waste, it's through industry, and packaging, electronic waste, cars and batteries will be financed through extended producer principle when that comes into law. So from the 5th of May, you will have to start registering with a PRO, and by the 5th of November, it'll be the scheme should be improved and in full operation. Thanks, Patricia. Sustainability is a must-aim principle of the legislation, closing all the material loops, cradle to cradle, circular economy, and so forth. Already in place for metals. Producers are actively working on plastics. It's all about preserving South Africa for the generations to come, and that's really important from an environmental perspective. The next slide, Patricia. As I mentioned before, the PRO governance is absolutely critical, I say this not just because Patricia's in the room with me and we've been doing presentations together, but I know Light Cycle. I know who they are, how they come about, what the ethos is, and likewise with eWASA. As I mentioned, I formed it in 2005, and since 2008. Even though we're a small not-for-profit, we've had 16 years of clean audits. We follow big company guidelines. We're exceptionally protective about our brand, and I'd like to say, without fear of recrimination, our brand has got a name in the industry and in the sector, and that's what we pride ourselves. And being, coming from big industry, efficiencies are important to me. So from an eWASA point of view, we don't want to be the biggest PRO, but we want to be the best PRO. Why? Because we want to ensure that things are done effectively, efficiently, and at the best cost rate, and not pay have a board of directors earning huge salaries. For me, that's not what it's all about. And time will judge us, but I'm quite happy that we can stand up to that kind of scrutiny. And it's important to ensure that that there's a level playing field for all stakeholders, and the control system, as I mentioned, to ensure governance is effective and appropriate. And that's what we've been arm wrestling with DEF around certain other regulations. The playing field has to be level. If you want the job done properly, you need to have rules, and you either decide whether you're going to be a referee, and a PRO would be regarded as a referee, or do you want to be a player? And a player would be either refurbisher or recycler or dismantler. But you can't be both, because then there's a huge conflict of interest, and then you have all sorts of funny businesses taking place. I thank you for the opportunity, and there my contact details are there as well. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions now or later, or whatever the case may be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks to Patricia and Keith for that presentation. Keith, I'll hand over you to take the questions and coordinate that. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. There's only 3 questions that have come up. The first one just indicates whether there'll be 1 plan or 3 plans. I'm not sure what the plans refer to, whether it's the different categories of waste, as you mentioned, lighting and then e-waste.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
So sorry, Patricia, if I understand the question, each sector will have to submit their own scheme. So packaging and paper would submit a scheme, an EPR scheme. Light Cycle SA would submit a scheme, and eWASA would submit an e-waste scheme, because it's 3 different sectors, so there are 3 different schemes. The underlying question that I might just add there too is, where it's sometimes confusing for some producers, is should I belong to packaging or e-waste or lighting, because I've got all 3. It's what is your core business. So for example, if you take Canon, for example, Canon, when they bring their product in from Europe, because they don't assemble them in South Africa, they come in already packaged and it's treated at that point in time. So they only belong to one PRO, which would be for example, eWASA. I think Patricia can comment the same on lighting.
Yes. So the questions that we get asked is quite often is, I'm a producer or a brand owner or a retailer that brings in products under my brand name, and we import both electrical and electronic products as well as lighting. So which PRO do we register with? So it is, if you are bringing in lighting and electronics and electrical, you would then be required to register with 2 PROs. But that's just the way the department or the minister wanted to separate lighting out. from the waste electrical and electronic equipment broader definition. So lighting producers or retailers and so on would need to register with Light Cycle SA, and any electrical and electronic equipment, and we're talking all electrical, heavy to light current, would need to register with eWASA, which covers the electrical and electronic notice. Paper and packaging, you know, we get asked the question, you know, but I import stuff that has paper and packaging on it, or it comes in a box. No need to register with the paper and packaging PROs. That's covered under their take-back systems. It's only if you import packaging, or if you import or produce packaging, or plastic, or glass, or product, you know, packaging, then you would need to register with the paper and packaging PROs. And just to also add that to Keith, lighting was banned from landfill, or restricted to landfill, in August 2016. So most of industrial lighting is, and I was saying, well, not most, a big portion of industrial lighting is taken care of within the recycling chain, but your domestic and your household and your small businesses and so on, it's still disappearing somewhere, and we call that leakage. And this is what the department is trying to get tightened on. This is to make sure that all of that waste, lighting waste and electronic waste and electrical waste that has been leaked from other channels, that those are captured.
Great, thank you. The next question, and I think it's linked to that as well. Do you use battery cells? I think you did cover that. And printer ink cartridges form part of eWaste.
Yes. So any product that is or a part that is used in electronic or electrical product, like a cartridge or a battery, or anything that is part of that main product or component, is eWaste, or waste electrical and electronic equipment. So batteries, yes, batteries will be covered. They are also banned from landfill. All batteries, all battery chemistries, regardless of type, size, will be banned from landfill as of August this year. And all electrical and electronic products will be banned from landfill this year in August. Lighting, as I said, was in 2016. And lighting, it's important to also note that it's all lighting equipment. So it's not just the light itself, but it's it's the luminaire, it's fixtures, fittings, even the light poles and so on, street poles, light poles, everything. It's all listed under lighting equipment, and all of that is now going to be governed and managed under EPR. And you can't just go sell a luminaire, for example, at a scrap dealer. That's breaking the law, that's illegal. The scrap dealer can be fined, and the producer is ultimately held accountable and responsible, and it'll come back to the producer, and those fines will be imposed on the producer. So it is important to make sure that that you as producers from all these electrical and electronic sectors register with a PRO, so that you can keep abreast with what's happening.
Okay. And the consumer then, for example, with I know that there's collection points for CFLs, etc. But for example, as you said, printing ink cartridges, battery cells, the consumer might just dispose of those in the normal waste, which is then picked up, yes, and dumped to the site. How does a producer then prevent the consumer actually just doing that, and then how is the producer then held responsible?
Okay, a very good question, actually. Very, very good question. And Keith can maybe also add to it as well. So part of the regulations is the PROs will be required to set up collection facilities around the country. And that can be at retailers, it can be at the actual manufacturer's facility. at the warehouses. It can be at various municipal sites and so on. But the waste generated, or the waste generator, if the waste generator is your general householder, that is covered under your municipalities and your municipal regulations. And both eWASA and Light Cycle SA are currently sitting with all the municipalities, with the South African local government authorities, and working with the municipalities so that they can assist, or the PROs can assist, and they can work together to get this waste from consumers and from the dustbins into recyclers. Keith, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. So I think one of the bigger problems is, once again, it's because bearing in mind that this legislation is now coming into effect. So a lot of awareness and education, training, and plans need to be put in place to educate consumers how to separate their waste, or where these collection points are. So if for example, we refer potential clients or queries to go and visit our website, www.ewasa.org, and if you look at the bottom of on the landing homepage, you'll see there's a map of South Africa with a whole lot of pins. And if you held your cursor over that, it'll show you all the collection points. So currently we have approximately 1,000 collection points in place. And Life Cycle, if we added theirs, it would increase the number even further. But in real terms, when EPR is up and running, both from a lighting and an e-waste perspective, we probably need between 6,000 and 8,000 collection points to be able to treat it properly. Because don't forget, the EPR scheme says that it must be convenient for the consumer to go to a collection point close by to where they are to drop off those at these certified collection points. So it is a big challenge, but we think we know how to deal with it. And as Patricia has mentioned, municipalities can play a big role in assisting with the program as well.
Thanks. Then there's another question. Is there a drive to encourage producers not to produce products that generate hazardous waste? And are there maximum limits on the Act, and how much, as to how much of that waste can actually be generated?
Yeah, so part of the circular economy is exactly that. Is one of the steps of circular economy is to ensure that upstream you start producing products that have less impact on the environment and are more environmentally friendly. And some producers have already got a rating system that they put onto their pocket, fully recyclable or partly recyclable, and they have energy stars on there as well. So that trend is growing, but it's still got a long way to go. And once again, part of the EPR schemes, and once the funds are starting to flow, certainly from a Light Cycle SA perspective and eWASA perspective, we have got some initiatives to start addressing that further upstream as well. And that's once again where you work closer with recyclers, because they're the guys that ultimately have to take it all apart. And they often come up with good suggestions about that'll help the guys upstream.
Yeah, so, and I'll add to that, you'll see in the targets that I put up on the screen, that table, it speaks about recyclability and the percentage of a product that is recyclable. So I have been talking to quite a few lighting producers. There are some innovative things happening around that, but should a product be more one product be more recyclable than the other, the one that's more recyclable will have a lower EPR fee than the one that is less recyclable. So the incentive is there for the producer to manufacture their product to be more recyclable, because at the end of the day, they'll pay less in terms of the extended producer responsibility fee. And the reason why it's you pay more, because the recycler has to deal with a product that is difficult, it has problematic fractions in it, and it increases their costs. So again, it's the targets are based on collection targets, recovery targets, and recyclability targets.
Okay, thanks. So those questions were from Becky Masikani. Then there's a question from Janet Gillespie on recover rates. How do you determine the recover rates? For example, an LED lamp produced today could only become waste in 5 to 10 years. And I guess that applies to batteries as well. How would you determine the recovery rates? Because you'll have various time periods, even for the same product to become waste.
Okay, so sorry, if she's referring to the recovery rates in the targets, if she can just clarify that, I can answer that question.
I think it refers to your, your 12% that we are now recycling.
Okay.
How do you know 12% of what? If somebody purchases it today, they may only need to recycle it in 5 or 10 years.
Yes, so that's why it's called an extended producer responsibility fee. So there are legacy products out in the market. There are products that are out there now that are coming into the waste stream daily, and so your extended your advanced recycling fee, if you want to call it that, it's paid when the product is put on market, and it will cover those products, all the products from that point on when they reach end of life, and the legacy products that are coming in to the recyclers. In terms of recovery rates on the targets, those targets is the recovery there is the ability to separate the various fractions from the product and liberate it for further recycling. So recovery in that sense means how much of that product can you recover for recycling? That is what the recovery rates are in terms of the targets. But in terms of collection and the volumes of collection, there are products out there that will last 15 years, but that product is covered at its end of life. Keith, you want to expand on my points?
Yeah, I think so. Once again, so the other part of that equation too, or the question is the life cycle of products. So some producers have got life cycle assessments on certain of their products, not all their products, but certain of them. And there's one of the big debates that we're having is, should there be a life cycle assessment done on each and every product, that it says this computer's life cycle is 5 years, this refrigerator's life cycle is 10 years. There are some of that information available, but it's fairly limited because it's a very costly process. To do a full life cycle assessment can cost anything up to 500,000 Rand per life cycle assessment. So once again, part of the system that gets put in place, once those products actually get treated responsibly, the responsibility exists with the recycler to record the serial number of that particular product, and they report back to us, and that's where we will start gathering the information. Right now, it's all guesswork because there's no compliance for anybody to record and report, but it will now become necessary for them, and if they don't, they can get fined up to, I think it's 5 million Rand and 5 years in jail. So there's a big stick out there, and once again, it'll allow us to work on proper data as opposed to assumptions.
Thanks. Then there's a question which I think you answered. Where do we get a list of collection points in our area? I presume it's your website, the eWASA website.
Correct, and I think, Patricia, you got one as well, haven't you?
Lifecycle SA currently have not set up any collection facilities to date. It's in the development within the scheme, but there are private recycling entities that have got collection facilities available, but you can contact me for that, for lighting. At the moment, the way it works for electrical and electronic waste and lighting waste, your customer pays to have that waste removed. And in this case, the PRO will be taking over those the costs and the collections of that. So there are collection facilities out there for lighting at various centres, but that is a paid for service by whoever manages that collection facility at this point in time. Until the PRO scheme comes into effect, and when it's implemented, the cost then shifts to the producer and through the PRO. And that is from any time from the 5th of May, because the scheme gets developed and it gets submitted, and it's 60 days from date of submission that the producers will then become obligated and will then need to start paying EPR fees. And if you want to be involved in that, to make sure that you're paying the fair amount according to what you bring into the country or put on market, it is good to get involved now, so that you don't get hit with something that you haven't been a part of.
Thanks. Then there's a question relating to the number of PROs from rare earth recycling. It says the EPR regulations allow more than one PRO per waste stream. Why do you say that there can only be one PRO? I think it refers to your presentation where there was just one PRO for lighting industry, for example.
Yes.
Can there be, and will there be other PROs?
I think that's Mark. Hi, Mark, from Rare Earth Recycling. He is aware that there is the PRO at the moment. There is one lighting PRO, and that is established in 2018, and it is the only PRO at this point in time. But there is not to say that it must be the only one. There is opportunities for other PROs, or to join another PRO like eWASA, for example. So no, it is not saying that it is the only PRO. At this point in time, Lightcycle SA is the only PRO for lighting. And the lighting sector is actually very small. And after doing studies and doing research, you know, one PRO would be sufficient for the lighting sector in South Africa. Not to say that there can't be more than one.
Right, thanks. And then just a question on the board of the PRO. You mentioned it consist of the producers. Is that not a conflict of interest, or are the PRO's board totally independent of the producers?
So let me speak from that. That's a good question. Having spent 15 years running the PRO and having traveled the world to visit a whole host of other countries and to see how they've run their schemes and how it's worked and what hasn't worked. So you're absolutely right, and that's why I come back to, and I made that comment early on about the integrity and independence. So it would be an absolute conflict of interest if you had PROs, recyclers sitting on the board. You can't do that because, as I said, you can't be referee and player. So we have a completely independent board, which is the executive board, the day-to-day running board. Then we have a number of forums. So you'd have, just to use an example, you'd have the battery forum, or you'd have the ICT forum, or you'd have the electric vehicle forum, who would be made up of those members who would then meet quarterly and give input into the board. Bearing in mind that right at the top we have also what we call an advisory board, and that's all that it is. That's an advisory made up of producers only. So they would nominate. We'd say on the advisory board we making 12 seats. I'm just giving you an example that we're making 12 seats available. So all the producers, guys, you can nominate 12 people at an AGM. You can nominate 12 people to serve on that advisory board. They've got no influence on an involvement in the day-to-day running. They just, from a producer, because don't forget, producer initially pays the fee, and I say initially pays the fee because ultimately it's the consumer, the last person in the line, that actually pays the EPR fee. But they're there just to give input and to manage and give guidance around what the fees should be, but nothing to do with the day-to-day running of operation. I don't know if that helps you.
Yes. Yes, and I'll add to that from a light cycle perspective. There is a board of directors that are the, if you want to call it for lack of another word, the founding members of light cycle. They are lighting producers. They established, and the regulations call for that, by the way. The regulations state that the PRO must be run by a board of directors, and the regulations are written for producers, and it must be implemented and managed by producers. So hence the PRO is established by producers, and as Keith said, they sit in a they don't get involved in the day-to-day operations. They are clearly just there to provide guidance and oversight, and to ensure that all producers, lighting producers' interests are protected. So there will be separate governance structures and so on, and governance is very, very, very important in PROs, as Keith mentioned earlier, because governance is your key to ensure that there is no conflicts of interest, that the producers' interests, or the lighting producers, or the electronic and electrical producers' interests are protected, and that the money is spent for the intended purpose. So governance is one of the key things that one would need to look at when you're looking at a PRO, to ensure that all the governance structures in place, and that they have their reporting and everything above board, including auditing and so on.
Great, thanks. Then there's a question from Frans van Neerainen. He said that a lot of e-waste collectors do not accept CFLs, and then ask, what do we do in that case?
Okay, so e-waste collectors will not accept CFLs purely for the reason is because there's no value in a CFL. A CFL is what we term in the industry a negative value item. A laptop, for example, will be a positive. You get positive, neutral, and negative. So lighting would be negative. So in other words, it costs money to bring that in and recycle it and recover the value out of it, if you want to speak that way. Whereas a laptop, for example, it has value upfront that you can recover. So the reason why they won't take it, because they would then have to take that that CFL and take it to a lighting recycler that they would have to pay to recycle it because of the negative value of that product. But this is also the main intention of EPR, is to cover those negative waste streams, the neutral waste streams, and to ensure that the positive waste streams, that not only the value is extracted, but that the non-value fractions are also taken care of.
If I could just add on to what Patricia is saying there too, just to help you too. So one of the things that that eWASA and Lifecycle South Africa are busy cooperating on is finalizing an MOU. And as I mentioned before, that we need to quadruple the number of collection points across the country. And some of the lighting recyclers are members of eWASA as well. So just like in the airlines, you have a code share agreement, there's a strong possibility that we could have a code sharing agreement between us. So a consumer who's got a mixed bag of e-waste, which includes lighting, could take it to one of our certified collection points, which would then make sure that the lighting gets treated via the process that that Patricia has just described. So that's something for the future, because don't forget, you want to make the economies, the scale, and the transport is such a big cost factor. So we think there's a possibility we can deal with it that way.
Thank you. That is the Chairman. That's the end of the questions that have come up. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. I'll hand back to you now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rob, for taking care of the questions. Okay, a lot has come out of this presentation. We need to act responsible and protect our environment. All our solutions, be it technical, electrical, electronic, we must incorporate measures to mitigate adverse consequences. We must repair, reuse, recycle, and then dispose. So yes, these are general environmental concerns all over, and you can see it's now come into our industry as well. And with that, we come to the end of another learning and sharing session. Our thanks go to Patricia and Keith for sharing their passion and knowledge, to Dr. Rob Stephen for his ongoing support, to the SAIEE for providing a platform to share knowledge and expertise, and to our attendees for making this possible. Please visit the SAIEE website on www.saieee.org.za for upcoming events. And remember, wear your mask, sanitize regularly, and maintain physical distancing. Take care and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.